comes to how we see value on a human life in this world. And so what that does to us is it changes the way we think we can trust God. Because if God has paid for it all, can we trust Him if He's called us to the next step? Can we trust Him to take us to the next step? And He wants us to know that we can trust Him, because He's going to be with us, leading us in that next step. Now, that's going to change everything in how we view one another if we do this together. When Pete read earlier the letter that was written in 130 AD and describing the Christians and how they were devoted to one another, they were continually devoting themselves to one another and to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. What was the result of the community around them looking in and seeing how they loved each other? Well, God chose to give them favor with everyone around them, and says it added to their number daily those who were being saved. How does the world look in at us now? How does the world see us now? Well, for the large part, I think they see us like they see everybody else in the world, only maybe just a little weirder. Because they don't realize that even though we've been given a different standard to live by, that we don't do it very well, because it's counterintuitive to us because of our sinful nature. And so what God's calling us to do is to go with Him on the journey of reorienting the way we live and redefining what we will place value on in this world. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 6, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What are those treasures that are stored up in heaven? What are they? Well, they're people. They're people. Those are the treasures. That's what God values. People. He so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. He loves people. And the treasures that we store up in heaven are people. And so the reason we want to see a tipping point in that direction is we want, when the culture looks at us, we want them to see us as caring about people and redefining where we place value. This takes time. We have to continue to show up time after time. It's why every single week there are volunteers from Northland who go to 7 correctional facilities, and some of them have been going for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It's why every week there are folks who are downtown in downtown Orlando serving the homeless down there. It's why every week, you get the point, that it requires consistent, persistent perseverance along the way. That's how we build up trust, by making more deposits than withdrawals into the culture. That's how we build up trust. And the dividends that pays, we see in relationship with these places that I've been telling you about all around the world. The places that God has kept us present in all around the world. And let me tell you about one of those places where that's happened and how it happened. I mentioned to you that one of the distributed training centers that is in development is in New Mexico. This is actually in the Zuni tribe, the Zuni Indian tribe in New Mexico. And the way we became connected to them is a young man named Chris Piramali grew up here at Northland. He went to college, went to medical school. While he was in medical school, he met his wife. They got married, and they believed that God called them to go and serve places in the United States. And so they moved to New Mexico and moved to the Zuni tribe there. And they had been there just a short time. They established a medical clinic. Chris called me and said, to our knowledge, there's no Christian presence here in this entire tribe. 40% of the tribe is in jail, is incarcerated. And there are significant social problems and spiritual problems throughout this tribe. What do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think you should start a church. And he said, well, who would come and do that? Who would God send to do that? And I said, God already sent somebody to do that. He sent you to do that. And so Chris and Barb, they just began to open their home on Thursday nights to people. And at first there were just 5 or 6 people that came. And they would have communion together, they would have supper together, they would talk about the Bible, they would talk about the things going on the reservation. And then they would go home. And so Chris and Barb continued to do that, and the group grew in number. It went from 5 or 6 to 50 or 60. And then Chris and Barb realized that God was calling them to go do this same thing with a Native American tribe in Alaska who had no medical resources at all within over 100 miles of any of these people. And so Chris called and said, we really think God's calling us to this next place to start a medical clinic. And but we don't know what to do with the Zuni tribe. And I said, is there anybody there that looks like they could take over leadership? And Chris says, well, there's a math teacher in the school who really loves Jesus. So we got on Skype with him. His name is Tim, and we talked to him about, continuing this and even expanding it some. And Tim said, well, I don't have the same credibility with the tribal leaders that Chris and Barb had. But he said, so I think that because of your relationship to Chris and Barb, it's complicated here, I think you need to talk to the tribal leaders and ask them if we can continue this. And I said, happy to do that. And so we set up a Skype conversation. And I was picturing that when the screen came on, that there would be 2 or 3 tribal leaders sitting there on their end of the Skype call. But when it happened, their whole tribal council was seated there looking at us. And it was a little intimidating, to say, well, we'd love to help you establish a church on your reservation. And the first thing that one of the main leaders said, do you know anything about prison ministry? Because so many of our young people are in jail. And I said, as a matter of fact, we do. Matter of fact, we work in 7 correctional facilities in Central Florida. We'd love to tell you what we've learned there. And he said, do you know anything about addiction? I said, as a matter of fact, we do. Every Friday night, there's a Celebrate Recovery group at Northland. And he went on down the line, do you know anything about family dysfunction? And I said, man, we're the most dysfunctional group of people you'll ever find anywhere. We know everything about that. And so November 2nd, 3 of us are going out there to New Mexico, and we're going to spend a couple of days with these folks. We're going to see this thing go to its next step. Because not our faithfulness, but Chris and Barb, who were faithful to those people and opened doors that we couldn't do. And started with Chris being a middle schooler here at Northland and saying, I'm going to do something different with my life. You're never too young to begin that process. And so that's going to happen. But what it's going to take is us being willing to, over these next 2 years, to reorient our whole perspective on what it means to pray and what we pray for, what it means to give and what we give toward, and how then we will live our lives in this world. What it will require in a significant way from all of us is courage. And courage in the life of a Christian looks different than it does in a non-Christian. Courage in the life of a Christian, you saw the courageous work that Jesus did in going to a garden, going to a cross, laying down his life. That was courageous work that he did. And the courage that it requires of us will often look like vulnerability. If you've ever read any of the work of Brene Brown and others who have worked on this, they say that one of the most difficult things for us to do as human beings in our relationships with one another is be vulnerable with one another, to be open to one another, to not make our relationships transactional, but to make them open and honest and truthful. And so for us, that's going to be a stretch. It's a stretch for everybody. Let me tell you one last story, and I promise this is the last one. So there's this guy that's a friend of mine named Tom Black. Tom helped start an organization called the Willow Creek Association some years ago. He also works with an organization, the Barna Organization. And Tom now leads an organization that has a similar vision to us, who wants to plant churches all over the world, small personal churches all over the world. And so we've been talking a lot with Tom and his organization, and we meet regularly with them. And Tom is one of the most passionate men I've ever met. He's passionate about everything. He's especially passionate about the Chicago Cubs, just want you to know. But Tom was here on Thursday, and we were just talking. We were just in my office talking, and Tom told me this story that I just can't quit thinking about. And so I asked his permission if I could tell it to you, and he said I could. And here's the story. Tom was telling me that last year in the Christmas season, he had just finished speaking at a conference, and it's one of those conferences where he had spoken for several days and multiple times each day, and he was worn out. He flew back home to Chicago, and as soon as he walked in the door, his wife Debbie said, "Let's go to the mall." And he said, "The last thing in the world I want to do is go to the mall." And I told her, "I don't want to go to the mall." And she said, "Just go to the mall. We haven't seen each other in days. Let's go to the mall. We'll have some quality time." And he said, "You can never have quality time at the mall. I don't want to go to the mall." And she said, "Just ride with me there." And he said, "Okay, I'll go with you, but I'm taking my book. I'm going to go to the food court. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to read my book. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm not going to engage anyone. If anyone comes and sits down at my table, I will not confer with them in any way while you do your shopping. I will not go into a store